Darwin warned us long before the Neanderthal myth was built. Looking at the famous Neanderthal skull, he did not call it crude, stupid, or bestial. He called it well-developed and capacious. And that one phrase quietly cuts through one of the oldest caricatures in human origins. The idea that Neanderthals were simple brutes, too clumsy to hunt well, too limited to throw well, and too primitive to stand beside our own ancestors as dangerous, intelligent, skilled human beings. The deeper you look at the old picture of the Neanderthal, the stranger that caricature becomes. The popular image was never simply a fossil interpretation, it was a story. And like many stories in human origins, it became powerful because it was easy to imagine. There was the stooped creature in the cave, the heavy brow, the jutting face, the thick bones, the short limbs, the broad chest, the massive hands, and the old assumption that anything built differently from modern Homo sapiens had to be inferior. From that assumption came the scavenger myth, the idea that Neanderthals lurked at the edge of the Ice Age world, waiting for lions, hyenas, wolves, and coal to do the hard work, then shuffling forward to scrape meat from carcasses they could not win themselves. It was a tidy story because it placed us above them. We were the hunters, the planners, the throwers, the innovators. They were the muscle, without the mind. That was where things stood in the imagination, even as the bones themselves kept saying something else. Now consider this. A Neanderthal skeleton is not the skeleton of an animal built only for helpless scraping at abandoned carcasses. It is the skeleton of a compact, powerful human adapted to a hard world of close distance, steep ground, cold air, heavy prey, and constant bodily strain. The chest was broad and deep. The shoulder region was wide. The collarbones were long. The arms were heavily muscled. The hands were strong, with thick finger bones and powerful thumbs. The legs were short in relation to the trunk, but they were not weak legs. They were dense, muscular, load-bearing structures built for climbing broken ground, bracing on slopes, cutting across ridges, carrying meat, dragging hides and closing distance against animals that could kill a human in one mistake. The waist was broad, the pelvis sturdy, the knees and ankles robust, and the bones often carry the marks of a life filled with extreme mechanical stress. This was not a failed version of us. It was a different design solution to a different set of problems. The old claim that Neanderthals were poor hunters collapses the moment their world is taken seriously. Ice Age Europe and Western Asia were not empty landscapes filled with sick animals politely waiting to be collected. They were contested ecosystems dominated by horses, deer, bison, aurochs, ibex, wild cattle, woolly rhinoceroses, mammoths, bears, lions, hyenas, and wolves. To survive there, generation after generation, through cold swings and shifting grasslands, Neanderthals had to obtain meat in a world where meat fought back. They were not living on scraps by accident. They were occupying caves, rock shelters, river valleys, coastal zones, uplands, and migration corridors where large animals passed again and again. Their bones show survival under stress, not incompetence. Their sights show repeated animal processing, patterned selection of prey, control of fire, stone tools designed for cutting and piercing, wooden technology, adhesive technology, and a level of practical intelligence that fits hunters who understood terrain, timing, animal movement, and risk. Something does not quite fit when people imagine such humans as incapable of throwing. The modern debate often turns on an oddly narrow question. Could Neanderthals throw a spear like a trained modern javelin athlete standing on a flat field? But that is the wrong comparison. A Neanderthal was not trying to win a stadium event. He was trying to kill at short range in broken terrain, under terrifying conditions, with weapons designed for the task at hand. A spear does not need to sail across a field like a modern sport implement to matter. A throwing stick does not need to follow the graceful arc of an athletic contest to break bone, stun prey, or force an animal into a bad position. A heavy wooden spear thrown from 10 or 15 yards, downhill, from behind cover, into a herd animal already trapped, cornered, slowed, wounded, or driven toward a cliff, is not a toy. In the hands of a short, massively strong human built for explosive upper body force, it is a weapon. This is where the body matters. Neanderthals had a shoulder and upper trunk arrangement that deserves more attention than the old brute caricature ever allowed. The wide shoulder blade region, the long collarbones, the powerful chest, and the strong arms all point toward a body able to generate serious force through the upper limb. Their shoulder anatomy differed from ours, and that difference is often treated as a limitation, as if every departure from modern Homo sapiens automatically means worse performance. But anatomy is not a ladder with us at the top. Anatomy is a set of trade-offs. A long-distance baseball pitch and a close-distance spear cast are not the same movement. A light javelin released for distance and a heavy hunting spear driven forward into an animal at short range are not the same problem. A Neanderthal did not need the exact shoulder pattern of a modern pitcher to be a terrifying thrower. He needed stability, grip strength, trunk power, rapid force, and the ability to coordinate a short, brutal strike through the whole body. Indeed, the short, strong Neanderthal build fits that world. Short limbs reduce heat loss, but they also create leverage patterns suited to close work, grappling, climbing, bracing, hauling, and rapid power in confined settings. A broad trunk gives a stable base for force transfer. Heavy arms and strong hands matter when handling thick wooden shafts, stone-tipped spears, clubs, digging sticks, throwing sticks, and carcasses. A lower centre of gravity is not a defect when moving across uneven ground or standing on a slope above animals. A person built like that does not need to look like a long-limbed modern distance runner to be dangerous. In fact, the opposite is true. Against large prey at close range, the body that matters is the one that can brace, twist, launch, recover, and survive impact. Neanderthals look less like failed athletes and more like specialists in a form of hunting that modern urban people barely understand. That is why the argument from modern college volunteers is so weak. When inexperienced modern people struggle to throw a replica Neanderthal spear, the result tells us very little about Neanderthals. It tells us that modern people, raised far from hunting landscapes, without childhood training in weapon handling, without years of strengthening the shoulders, wrists, hands, trunk and legs through survival work, are poor substitutes for Ice Age hunters. A person who has never hunted large animals with a wooden spear is not a measure of what Neanderthals could do. A student on a testing range is not a Neanderthal on a cliff edge above a herd. A brief trial with a reconstructed weapon is not a lifetime of skill learned from fathers, mothers, elders, siblings, and dangerous mistakes. The conclusion is almost absurd. Because untrained modern bodies cannot easily perform a prehistoric skill, the prehistoric experts must have lacked that skill. That is not science. That is the modern world mistaking its own weakness for an ancient limitation. There is a thing that happens again and again in human origins. A fossil population gets judged through the habits of the observer. If the observer values long-distance running, then a short, stocky body looks inferior. If the observer values modern throwing sports, then a different shoulder looks defective. If the observer values delicate tools, then heavy tools look crude. If the observer thinks progress always means becoming more like recent Homo sapiens, then Neanderthals always appear as unfinished. But the Ice Age did not judge bodies that way. The Ice Age judged whether a human could stay warm, move through snow, cross stone slopes, follow animals, strike at the right moment, carry meat, raise children, heal from injuries, and return to the group alive. By that standard, Neanderthals were not failures. They were among the most physically formidable humans ever to exist. The spear question has also been narrowed in a misleading way. People often imagine only two categories. Either Neanderthals thrust spears by hand at very close quarters, or they threw like modern humans across open ground. But prehistoric hunting sits between those extremes. A spear can be thrust, jabbed, pushed, dropped, cast, or driven downward. A stick can be thrown to stun, distract, wound, trip, or steer an animal. A hunting party can combine ambush, terrain, fire, noise, stones, wooden weapons, and close strikes. From a height, the calculation changes completely. A heavy spear cast downward has gravity on its side. A stone thrown from above is far more dangerous than the same stone thrown on flat ground. A wooden missile launched from a slope into animals crowded in a narrow path does not need Olympic distance. It needs timing. It needs nerve. It needs coordination. It needs hunters who know exactly where prey will run when panic begins. Neanderthals were perfectly placed for that kind of hunting. Many of their landscapes were made of ridges, ravines, cliffs, cave mouths, river terraces, limestone walls and narrow valleys where animal movement could be predicted. In such places, a short-range throw is not a desperate trick, it is an intelligent tactic. Imagine hunters positioned above a path where horses or deer pass below. Imagine a group working together, some driving, some waiting, some holding spears, some with stones, some with heavy wooden sticks. The moment the animals compress, a spear thrown from above becomes more than a projectile. It becomes part of a trap. It can wound, panic, slow, or force the herd into confusion. Then the close weapons finish the work. The old line between thrusting and throwing looks far too simple for the reality of Ice Age hunting. The Neanderthal hand also matters. These were not delicate hands built only for passive gripping. Their thumbs were powerful, their fingers were strong, their forearms show extraordinary development. The hand that can shape stone, scrape hides, grip shafts, butcher heavy animals, work wood and carry loads, can also handle weapons with force. A throwing stick requires grip, wrist control, shoulder power and practice. A spear requires balance and release. The fact that Neanderthals produced sophisticated stone tools and maintained hunting traditions across huge territories shows that they were not improvising randomly. Their technology was learned, repeated and adapted. A weapon tradition can exist even when wood rarely survives, because the stone, the injuries, the animal bones and the body all point toward a world where weapon skill was essential. The wooden spears from the deep past changed the discussion because they proved that ancient humans were making serious hunting weapons long before the late Ice Age. Straight wooden spears, carefully shaped from trees, balanced and sharpened, are not scavenger tools. They are hunting weapons. They show planning, selection of material, shaping, smoothing and knowledge of how wood behaves. Neanderthals inherited and developed within that broader world of wooden technology. And when wood enters the story, the old stone-centered view becomes incomplete. Stone survives. Wood disappears. Because stone survives better, archaeology often tells a stone-heavy story, but Ice Age hunting was never only about stone. It was also about shafts, handles, hafting, bindings, adhesives, throwing sticks, fire-hardened tips and wooden tools that vanished from most sites. The absence of preserved wood at a given place does not mean the absence of wooden weapons, it means the earth did not keep them. Anyway, the body shown in a Neanderthal reconstruction tells its own story. The skull is large, often larger in brain volume than many living humans. The brow is heavy, the face projects forward, the nose is broad, and the jaw is powerful, but none of those traits make the person simple. The chest is barrel-shaped and deep. The shoulder region is long and wide. The upper arm and forearm show heavy muscle attachments. The pelvis is broad. The legs are short and strong. The knee and ankle bones show robust structure. This is a human built like a cold climate power athlete, not a shambling scavenger. The body does not say helpless. It says strength under pressure. It says close range power. It says endurance in cold. It says repeated strain. It says an existence where every successful hunt demanded knowledge of animals, weapons, group action, and terrain. Darwin's phrase matters because it came before the later caricature hardened. He looked at the Neanderthal skull and called it well-developed and capacious. That was a warning hidden in plain sight. The skull was ancient, yes, and it was strange to modern eyes, but it was not small-brained. It was not a symbol of stupidity. It forced a more uncomfortable thought. An ancient human could look different from us and still possess a powerful brain. That idea should have slowed the rush to turn Neanderthals into brutes. Instead, the strange face overwhelmed the capacious skull in the public imagination. The brow became the story. The posture became the story. The heavy bones became the story. The brain, the hunting skill, the technology and the humanity were pushed behind the cartoon. In any case, the scavenger myth was always too convenient. It allowed a simple contrast between them and us. They scavenged, we hunted. They thrust, we threw. They endured, we imagined. They reacted, we planned. But the more evidence accumulates, the less that contrast holds. Neanderthals hunted large animals. They occupied dangerous places, they survived serious injuries, they controlled fire, they crafted tools, they processed hides, they managed stone resources, they worked wood, they buried some of their dead, they collected materials from landscapes they understood intimately, and they carried bodies that were not built for passivity. Every resolution has made them harder to place, not easier, because the more precisely we look at them, the less they resemble the simple opposite of ourselves. The question of throwing should be approached from that same perspective. The real question is not whether Neanderthals threw exactly like recent humans in a laboratory comparison. The real question is whether their bodies, weapons and environments made short-range missile hunting practical. The answer is yes. A broad upper body can generate force, a strong hand can control a shaft, a compact frame can rotate powerfully, a low centre of gravity can stabilize the throw on broken ground. A hunter on a slope or rock ledge can turn gravity into a weapon. A spear thrown 20 feet at a trapped animal is not a modern athletic performance. It is a lethal act inside a coordinated hunt. A throwing stick hurled at close distance into the legs or head of a smaller animal is not a symbolic gesture. It is a practical weapon. A stone thrown from above into a herd is not random. It is a tactic as old as the human arm. This does not mean every Neanderthal hunt was a display of elegant throwing. It means the old denial is wrong. They were not limited to one crude mode of attack. Their world required flexibility. Sometimes they closed in with thrusting spears, sometimes they ambushed, sometimes they took advantage of cliffs, ravines, snow, water, or herd panic. Sometimes they drove prey toward traps. Sometimes they finished wounded animals at close range. Sometimes they almost certainly threw stones, sticks, and spears at distances that made sense for their weapons. The modern obsession with long-distance flight misses the older reality of hunting, where 10 yards at the right moment is more important than 50 yards in an empty field. The injuries often connected with Neanderthals also fit a life of dangerous proximity, but proximity does not exclude throwing. It explains why throwing mattered. A hunter who must approach large animals wants every advantage before contact. A thrown spear at short range can weaken or distract prey before the final rush. A thrown stick can alter movement. A thrown stone can break rhythm. A downward cast from height can begin the kill before anyone steps within horn, hoof, or antler range. Close hunting was not a confession of low intelligence. It was a high-risk strategy demanding courage, communication, timing, and trust. The point is not that Neanderthals were less sophisticated because they came close to animals. The point is that coming close and surviving required extraordinary skill. Now consider the old museum image of the Neanderthal body again. The long collarbone, the broad shoulders, the deep chest, the strong arm bones, the huge hands, the wide pelvis, the short lower limbs. These traits do not describe a creature that could barely function. They describe a human adapted to a particular kind of power. Modern people often mistake grace for superiority. Neanderthals were not graceful in the way a distance runner is graceful. They were powerful in the way a wrestler, climber, butcher, cold weather hunter, and spear carrier is powerful. Their anatomy speaks of torsion, grip, pressure, and repeated impact. A light, long-limbed thrower can send a slender projectile far. A Neanderthal could drive a heavier weapon hard into a short-distance target. Those are different forms of danger. There is also a psychological mistake in the old myth. To imagine Neanderthals as scavengers is to imagine them as timid, marginal, and reactive. But a group that regularly faces Ice Age megafauna cannot be understood through timidity. They needed confidence. They needed memory of animal behavior. They needed communication before the hunt and discipline during it. They needed to know where a herd would move when threatened, when to approach, when to wait, when to strike, and when to retreat. They needed to teach young hunters without losing them. They needed to treat injury, share food, and maintain social bonds strong enough to keep wounded members alive. This is not brute survival. It is cultural survival under extreme conditions. The phrase well-developed and capacious skulls therefore becomes more than an anatomical note. It becomes a warning against judging intelligence by appearance. Darwin saw that the Neanderthal skull did not fit the easy image of a low creature. The brain case was large, the fossil was ancient, but it was not mentally negligible. Later generations often acted as if the strange face erased the large brain. But faces evolve under many pressures: climate, chewing, airway form, growth pattern, and ancestry. A projecting midface and heavy brow do not equal stupidity. A thick skeleton does not equal crude behavior. A different body does not equal failed humanity. The skull was telling us that the old categories were too simple from the start. And this is where the story becomes more interesting than the myth. Neanderthals were not merely strong. They were strong in a world that rewarded knowledge. They had to understand wood, stone, fire, animal bodies, weather, seasons, caves, roots, and each other. Their weapons were not random clubs picked up in panic. Wooden spears and stone-tipped implements belonged to technological systems. Hafting a stone point to a shaft means planning beyond the moment. It means selecting materials that fit together. It means producing adhesives or bindings. It means anticipating breakage. It means passing on technique. A people who can do that can also refine the way weapons are thrown, thrust, carried, repaired, and deployed from terrain. The college volunteer argument becomes even weaker when childhood training is considered. Prehistoric skill did not begin in adulthood. A Neanderthal child grew up surrounded by tools, hides, shafts, stones, fire, animal bones, and adults who depended on success. Throwing would have been practiced in play, in small game hunting, in imitation, in group activity, and in the endless physical education of a life outside modern comfort. By adulthood, the movement patterns would be ingrained. The shoulder, elbow, wrist, fingers, trunk, hips, knees, and feet would all be trained by daily work. A modern volunteer who handles a replica spear for an afternoon is not testing Neanderthal capacity. He is testing his own distance from the world that made Neanderthals. Something is wrong when the modern experiment becomes more authoritative than the ancient life. If a person who has never worked wood, never hunted large animals, never carried heavy carcass portions over rough ground, never thrown weapons as a daily skill, and never faced a charging animal cannot throw an ancient spear effectively, that failure is not a verdict on Neanderthals. It is a verdict on the mismatch between laboratory demonstration and lived adaptation. The Neanderthal body was not an abstract specimen, it was trained by existence. Bone form gives the inherited frame, but behavior sculpts the muscles, tendons, and coordination across a lifetime. The ancient hunter was not born merely with strong shoulders. He became a weapon handler through repetition. The old scavenger myth also ignored the moral weight of hunting. To hunt large animals with simple weapons is not merely to possess strength, it is to accept danger together. Every hunt carried the chance of broken ribs, crushed legs, pierced flesh, infection, and death. Neanderthals show injuries because their lives brought them into contact with risk, but the presence of injury is not proof of stupidity. It is proof that they were engaging a dangerous world at close quarters. A modern rodeo rider, climber, boxer, or soldier can carry injuries without being called primitive. Yet when Neanderthal bones show trauma, the old myth turns it into evidence of crude living. The fairer interpretation is that they lived in high-risk contact with powerful animals and survived often enough to build long traditions. Their short, robust bodies also make sense in relation to weapons at close range. A spear throw from short distance is not only an arm action. It begins in the feet, travels through the legs, hips, trunk, shoulder, arm, wrist, and hand. A strong base matters. A compact trunk matters. Rapid rotation matters. Balance matters. On uneven ground, a tall, long-limbed body is not always superior. A shorter hunter with powerful legs and a low center of gravity can plant, twist, and release with stability. When the target is close, maximum distance matters less than force, timing, and control. In that setting, Neanderthal anatomy looks less like a limitation and more like a highly functional hunting frame. The throwing stick deserves special attention because it is often left out of popular debates. A spear attracts attention because it looks dramatic, but a throwing stick is one of the simplest and most dangerous missile weapons humans have ever carried. It can be shaped from wood, balanced by experience, and thrown with enough force to break small animal bones, stun birds, strike limbs, or harass larger prey. It does not require the same motion as a slender spear. It suits short distance, quick release, and repeated practice. A Neanderthal with powerful shoulders and hands, standing above a path or near a herd, could turn such a weapon into a serious tool. The archaeological problem is preservation, not plausibility. Wood vanishes. Skill leaves fewer traces than stone. But the body, the ecology, and the broader human pattern all make the weapon logical. Spears, meanwhile, sit at the center of the argument because they force a choice between two outdated extremes. Either Neanderthals only thrust or they threw. But a real spear lives across a spectrum. A heavy spear can be held for defense, thrust into a trapped animal, cast downward from a slope, thrown at short distance, or handed between hunters. A group can carry different shaft lengths and different points for different tasks. A spear that flies poorly at long range can still be deadly at short range. The idea that a weapon must perform like a modern javelin to count as a thrown weapon is misguided. Hunting does not reward style, it rewards impact. In this sense, the Neanderthal was not a poor imitation of a modern hunter. He was a hunter shaped by a different battlefield. His prey was often large, strong and cold-adapted. His terrain was often broken. His climate demanded heat retention. His group size, mobility and technology demanded close cooperation. His body was not designed for one isolated movement tested by modern observers. It was designed by survival across many movements: lifting, cutting, scraping, climbing, bracing, striking, thrusting, throwing, carrying, and enduring. When all of that is placed together, the old idea that Neanderthals were incapable throwers begins to look like another fossil myth, not an evidence-based conclusion. Darwin's warning comes back at the center of the story. The Neanderthal skull was well-developed and capacious. That phrase should have made people cautious. It should have reminded them that an ancient human with a strange face could still have a powerful mind. It should have blocked the easy slide from anatomy to insult. But human origins has always been vulnerable to flattering stories. The story that we alone were clever, we alone were skilled, we alone were true hunters, and they were merely strong scavengers was flattering. It made modern Homo sapiens the hero by making Neanderthals the foil. The fossils have been pushing back ever since. Every better look at Neanderthals makes them harder to dismiss. Their bodies were not weak, their brains were not small, their tools were not meaningless, their hunting was not passive, their injuries were not proof of stupidity, their short limbs were not signs of failure, their broad shoulders were not ornamental, their hands were not clumsy, their world was not simple. The old brute was a story placed over the bones, and the bones have never fully agreed with it. The real Neanderthal was a compact, large-brained, powerfully built human who lived close to danger and carried a body suited to that life. He could thrust a spear, but he was not trapped inside thrusting. He could throw at short range, cast from height, hurl sticks, launch stones, and combine weapons with terrain in ways that modern tests barely capture. He did not need to resemble a baseball pitcher or a javelin champion to be deadly. He needed to be what his skeleton shows he was: strong through the trunk, broad through the shoulders, powerful in the arms and hands, stable on rough ground, and trained by a life where the difference between skill and failure was meat, injury, hunger, or death. In the end, the mystery is not whether Neanderthals were brutes. The mystery is why that idea survived so long after the bones had already warned against it. Darwin saw the large skull. He saw that it was well developed. He understood that ancient did not mean stupid, and once we placed that capacious skull on the broad shoulders, deep chest, powerful hands and short, strong legs of the Neanderthal body, the old scavenger story begins to fall apart. What stands in its place is not a monster, not a failure, and not a dull cousin waiting at the edge of extinction, but a dangerous Ice Age hunter whose body made sense in the world that created him, and whose true capabilities are still emerging from beneath the myth. Thank you for watching. The story of Neanderthals is not finished, because every new discovery keeps pulling them farther away from the crude stereotype and closer to something more challenging. A human form different from ours, powerful in ways we have forgotten, intelligent in ways the old story refused to see, and still capable of forcing us to ask whether the real brute in this history was ever the Neanderthal at all, or the modern imagination that made him smaller than he was.